We are getting really, really close to 1,000 subscribers. We'll see how many people hit subscribe on this episode here.
Episode 100 and subscriber 1,000. It's kind of shaping up to be possibly hitting it about the same time.
I bet subscribers will win. We'll see.
The D3 Datacast rolls on. We're heading into week 5 of the 2024-2025 Division III basketball season, and we have a lot to discuss this week. We have a new top 25 poll coming out. That means a new ballot from Matt. We're going to check in on the D3 Datacast computers to see how things have been moving in terms of efficiency ratings from the preseason now that we're getting in-season results. And all the fun of the picks and the mailbag. We've got a lot to do, Matt, but we need to start. We got a very concerning message from our errors and omissions department. Last week, of course, we talked about our Great Lakes Invitational Power Rankings, and we had a wonderful poll done by a great panel of people. However, we neglected to include Riley Zayas as one of our voters. Of course, we had a 7-member voting panel, not a 6-member voting panel, as it may have appeared on the slide. As we note here, I think the correct affiliation for Riley these days is everything.
Yeah, he's on d3hoops.com. He's on d3football.com. He's on his own Substack that you can subscribe to. And he's on sometimes with Scott Peterson on the YouTube edition on D3 Women's Hoops. So he does so much. Great guy. Glad to have him at the GLI last week.
And he's writing a book. He was there. He was interviewing all the coaches, getting a lot of legwork done for the book. Literally a man doing everything. Okay, with that out of the way, we'll try to have an error-free show going forward here, Matt. So speaking of error-free, let's get into your ballot. This is how you are voting as a D3Hoops.com top 25 voter this week.
Yeah, I'm staying right at the top. My top team is Trine. That did not change from last week. Number 2 is Illinois Wesleyan. Number 3 is Emory. Those did not change from last week. I did bump up Trinity, Connecticut 1 spot to number 4. When you beat the best team in the country like they did on Sunday, they beat Yeshiva by a large margin, 41 or 39 points. No, 41 points. 84-43 is the final score that I have jotted down in front of me. Then you got to move up a little bit. So Trinity moved up 1. WashU moved down. I'm not really low on WashU, but a couple of their scores have been a little bit closer than I wanted to see anyway. I still think WashU is really good. Keeping them in the top 5 is okay. Hampton-Sydney at number 6 for me. At number 7 is NYU. UW La Crosse is up at number 8. I think that they've looked really good. They had a good win over St. John's this week. UW Platteville has had 3 wins this week. Augustana, Heidelberg, and Gustavus Adolphus. They are back into my top 10 at number 9. Zach, WPI beat Tufts this week, and they are at number 10 for me. So I'm strong on WPI. Wisconsin, Lutheran, Worcester, Keene State, Whitworth. They're kind of in the same position they were last week for me at 11, 12, 13, and 14. TCNJ at 15. Gettysburg 16, Roanoke at 17. At number 18, Tufts. They did fall for me after losing to WPI, but I'm still keeping them in the top 20. I think they're a team I'm still excited about this season. I was taking that game. What was the final score of that? 74-61 WPI beat Tufts. So I'm taking that a little bit more of a good on WPI and not too much of a bad on Tufts at this point. So we'll see. Middlebury was in my ballot last week. They are at number 19 this week. Christopher Newport is staying in at number 20, although they're kind of doing a thing that Christopher Newport did last year, and they're having maybe some results mixed in that I'm not too sure about. This week it was an 80-65 loss at Averett. But Averett's going to be a team we're going to talk about later in this episode, so maybe this is not such a bad loss. But I'm still keeping Christopher Newport in my top 25 at 7-2. But yeah, there was a loss for them this week. Guilford at 21. That's a similar position. I am entering 6-0 Wesleyan, another NESCAC team, into my ballot at 22. Interested to see what they do. I'd like to see the competition level rise a little bit for Wesleyan, but good to see the results so far. St. John's, I talked about them above in the context of their loss at UW La Crosse. St. John's for me is number 23 this week. St. John's 2 losses are on the road at Calvin and versus UW La Crosse. For 4-2 St. John's, a team I'm still hanging in some preseason expectation. They've had some good wins in there as well. So not too concerned about St. John's. I don't think those losses are too bad right now. Stockton at 24, that's a new entrant into my poll. And then Catholic at 25 is new into my poll as well. So that's my ballot this week. I have not officially submitted it, so I could maybe change my mind last second. But when this episode, after we record, and this is encoding and uploading, I'm going to submit this ballot. It's probably going to be this exact thing.
And this is what it's going to be.
This is what it's going to be.
All right, I like it, Matt. We have a lot of teams to talk about, so I'm not going to dwell on your ballot too much here. I'm just wondering, with the loss St. John's took to La Crosse, I think maybe kind of like Tufts, you take that a little bit more, what it says about La Crosse than St. John's. But I'm wondering, a second consecutive loss, are they sort of entering a danger zone for you compared to preseason expectations?
I mean, yeah, at 23, they're going to be a danger zone. I think we're in a position where anyone that's in the last 5 positions on a ballot is kind of on par with the next 5 or 10 that you have. I've ranked out this week up to like a number 33. And almost any of those teams could slide in. So St. John's, I don't have their schedule in front of me what they're doing next week, but if they take more losses or are not competitive in a game, then yeah, they're at risk of falling out for sure.
All right, let's move into taking a look at the computer ratings biggest movers, Matt. This is what we want to spend a lot of time on. Of course, we put out an episode leading into the season, laying out those preseason computer ratings heading into the season. Those were based on a combination of factors, right? Based on a weighted average of how those teams performed over the previous 2 years, a little bit of mix of regression to the mean, and bada bing, bada boom, you've got a preseason rating. So talk us through a little bit how we get from there to where we are currently, and then where we're going to get down the line here in probably a few weeks.
Yeah, so I take that preseason number that a computer comes up with that you just explained, and I give every team 8 games worth of that preseason rating into their schedule. And then as a real game comes in, one of those projection games falls out. So after a team's first game, then they have 1 game's worth of data in their rating and 7 games worth of projection. We're now at a point where some of these teams have played 8 games, so they're kind of all in-season data. Some teams have maybe only played 3 or 4 Division III games, so they're more 50-50 as far as in-season data versus projection. So there's still an array of how much is in there, but we get that question a lot, like what do you do with the preseason rating? When are we just in-season data? For me, it's that 8 game mark for any program. After that, then we're only talking about in-season data. So again, for some of these teams on your screen that are on the rise, we still have some of that projection mixed in. We're going to have to see that fall out. And then as we get on further out in the year, it'll all be in-season data, of course. But then these early season games for my rating, my efficiency rating, will start to be less impactful than more recent games. So at game number 25, maybe your last 8 or 10 games are at full weighting, and then it starts to decline a little bit from there. But for right now, yeah, we're in a position where it's maybe for the average team, maybe 75% in-season data and 25% projection, but some teams are all the way at 100-0 already.
Yeah, I don't think there's too many of those that have reached the 8 game mark. There are some, but as I was scanning the list, I would say that almost everybody is at least at 4. So at the point where they would be like half preseason computer rating and half based on the games played so far. There are a few outliers. Maybe they've had to play a bunch of non-D3 games early in the season, or they're more geographically isolated, and so they've got more of a backloaded schedule. So there are some of those cases. But I think for the most part, it seems like the vast majority of teams are in that 4 to 6 game mark, which puts them anywhere between 50% and 75% of in-season data at this point. So this is not. So this is a bit of a check-in, shall we say, how things have been moving away from the preseason computer rating, where things stand now as it's sort of this mix of preseason expectation and in-season information coming in from games played so far.
Yes, let's just talk briefly down the list. This is top to bottom, the top 20 teams as far as the biggest improvement from the projection that we have so far. So, right up at the top is Center from the SAA. They were preseason number 308. Right now, they're number 87. Efficiency margin wise, that's 15.7 points higher than they were in the preseason. So, against an average team, what we know about them now versus what we thought about them in the preseason, if we gave them 100 possessions versus an average team, we think that they would actually be doing 15 points better now than we thought they would be doing when the season started. So Center has wins over Asbury, Fontbonne, Berea, Webster, Westminster, Missouri, Spalding. Their losses are to Mount St. Joseph and Laterno. Those wins that I read off don't really suggest the highest quality of competition level, but 6-2 is a solid start for Center. They're a program who's been under 500 since 2020, so that's like COVID shutdown period of time. But they were a team before that was like in the NCAA tournament a bunch. They were winning 20 plus games. So I don't know if there was something specific about COVID that, or if that's just like a marker in my mind, but they're kind of maybe on their way back to where they were before. And yeah, hopefully we can see them keep this up as the competition level rises. But they were like number 308 preseason. Right now they're in the top 100 at number 87. That's a big rise.
Yeah, you're definitely right. It seems like there's some programs that emerged out of COVID just the same as they were. There were some that it seemed to have really hit. Maybe that is what happened with Center. But after a couple down years, that really weighs down on that preseason expectation. Now it seems like maybe they're kind of back to normal. That program is back to where they were, used to being. And, that's a pretty good recipe for being a big mover up the board. Good to see that out of Center so far this season.
Yeah, and kind of these next two teams are similar to Center in a way that they were preseason in the 300s. So next is John Jay and Riviere. They were 387 and 371 in the preseason kind of rankings, respectively. But right now, they kind of jumped to the other side of the top 200. So I kind of think of that as like the midpoint in Division Three. We have 400 and what, like 13 teams, 412 teams, something like that. So if you're in the top 200, you're in the top half. So John Jay is a half a point above that, and Riviere is 3.1. That's a way you can move a lot in the from preseason to the in season. Is if you were kind of really bad the last couple of years and the computer thinks you're going to be bad this year and you're just kind of average, that's a really big improvement. So for John Jay, they're 5-3. They had single digit win totals last season, and they're in the Cognac. We know the Cognac is not the strongest league out there, so John Jay was not, the computers were not in love with John Jay, I should say. But like I was kind of mentioning before, if you go from the 10th percentile to the 40th percentile or the 50th percentile, like that's a really big improvement. So credit to John Jay for what they've done so far this season. We'll have to see if they are competitive with like the Baruchs of the world in the Cognac down the stretch. For Riviere, that is a 6-2 start. They were 15-12 last year, so they were kind of a little bit above 500, but just 2-23 the year before. I know my preseason projections look at the last two seasons, so that 2-23 was still weighing in there. Looks like they're probably closer to the 15-12 program of last year, if not a bit better than that. Their one loss of the season is to Roger Williams. We know Roger Williams was in the NCAA tournament a year ago. So Riviere looking strong, looking like kind of like an average to above average Division III team this season. So I'll see how that continues.
And something here that just sticks out to me that I think is important as we get further into the season and start thinking about NPI and how that works. You talked about the collection of wins for like John Jay and Riviere. John Jay wins over Washington College, Sarah Lawrence, Old Westbury, Sage, Pratt. And it's not maybe a collection of wins that are very impressive, but when you're stacking those wins up against each other, what you're essentially telling the computer is, hey, here's this group of teams. We've gone 5-0 against this group of teams, therefore we are clearly better than that group, right? So wherever you rank them, we're somewhat higher than that group. And so you talk about making a move from like the bottom 10th percentile to like somewhere around the midpoint.
Yeah.
It's by doing things like that, and I think that's helpful to think about it that way, because I think that in a lot of ways is how you can think about NPI, right? You're looking to stack up wins against as high a level of competition as possible so that you're trying to show in that NPI, the way NPI works with that calculation is, here's this group of teams. We've gone, 5-0 against this group of teams. Therefore, we are very clearly better than wherever that group is.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if you're playing teams ranked in like the 200s and 300s, if you're consistently beating those teams, it means you should be ranked above that group of teams, right? Like you said. So I think that is a helpful way to look at it for sure. The next team on our list is from the Little East Conference. That's Eastern Connecticut. They are 6-0. They've won all their games this season. That includes a win over Conn College. That's a NESCAC team. Coast Guard, that's a NUMAC team. So if you're Eastern Connecticut looking to rise your way back up, they were a team that's been competitive in the Little East in previous seasons, but not necessarily the last couple of seasons. But they're looking strong so far. Looking for maybe a challenger to Keene State in this year. Last couple of seasons, maybe that was Western Connecticut. Let's see if that's Eastern Connecticut this year ahead. The next one to talk about here is Amherst. They are 4-2. They are one of those traditional powers, but they haven't won more than 15 games in any of the last 3 seasons. Their wins this year over Western Connecticut, over Springfield, over Rhode Island College, and over Lynchburg. Their losses are to WPI. We talked about them being highly ranked on my ballot, so that's not a bad loss. And they've also lost to Marymount, which if you're Amherst, maybe you don't really want to lose to Marymount. But this year, that's not a terrible loss. Marymount looks pretty good. Right now, for the Mammoths, a lot of work is being done by beating kind of averagey teams by big margins. But the computer thinks that that's somewhat meaningful. And really, I think some credit to Amherst. They haven't really been playing bottom feeders. They haven't really beaten anyone great. Their 2 losses are to okay teams, but they've kind of played and beat averagey type teams. So we'll have to see what that's like for them ahead as they kind of play more of their NESCAC schedule.
And as I maybe made the mistake of bringing NPI into the previous discussion, worth pointing out here that where, this computer is impressed by large margins against average-ish teams, the way NPI works is it's just a matter of wins and losses. There's no margin of victory component to it. Right. So that would be less beneficial to the way Amherst would look in NPI versus a computer rating that does take some sort of margin of victory into account, like the efficiency ratings hosted here, or like the Massey ratings.
Right. And in NPI, if you lost to the number 1 team, if you lost to them by 1 point, NPI would treat that as a loss. It doesn't matter if you lost to them by 1 or by 39. Whereas our D3 Datacast efficiency ratings, if you lost to the number 1 team by 1 point, it would think you're about as good as the number 1 team because it was a really close game. So yeah, that is another difference about what we're doing here versus what NPI will do. Another team on the rise is TCNJ. They were 20-9 last year. They won the NJAC tournament. They got into the NCAA tournament. They lost to Eastern by only 1 point in the first round. The computer knows all that last year. They're 6-0 to start the year. They're putting up legitimately good efficiency numbers this year. 2 closest games was an OT win over Drew on a neutral court. Drew's been one of the teams talked about in the landmark. And then a 2-point home win over Baruch. The computer doesn't love that 2-point home win over Baruch, but when it feels like that's like one of your worst or lowest ranked results, that's kind of a nitpick. So the computer's pretty high on TCNJ, even despite that kind of big run to end the season in the NJAC and into the NCAA tournament. Maybe thought like, well, that's going to push their ranking higher than they will be this year. But no, they've been off to an even stronger start this year, and the computer is actually very fond of them right now. Coming up next for us is Ohio Northern. They have wins over Vassar, over Bluffton, over Kenyon, and over Adrian. They have 2 losses on the year. One is to Gettysburg, a pretty highly ranked team, and to Baldwin Wallace. Both were by 2 points, I think, and both on the road. We need to see them winning games against higher level of competition, but the Polar Bears could be on the fringes of OAC contention this year. And actually, Zach, I say fringes of contention, but if you look right now, OAC is the top rated OAC team by these efficiency ratings. So that's a league with John Carroll, with Mount Union, with Marietta, teams that have been like number 1 in the country and or in the Final Four the last few years. Like all those teams have kind of checked off 1 or 2 of those boxes. So it will be interesting to see what Ohio Northern does in OAC play, but already the computer likes them. Plus 13 points of efficiency margin from kind of the fringes of the outside of the top 100 to number 29 overall.
Well, and of course, an injury situation really shaking up the outlook of that OAC race, something we know, but the computer doesn't know that yet. So particularly interesting to see that the computer already likes Ohio Northern in the early season results there. Very, very interesting. That's going to be something to follow. All right, next up on the list, Matt, we have Trine, which is very interesting to see them here as one of the biggest movers, because you'd figure teams near the top don't have a lot of room to be big risers, but the defending national champions look like they're having no problem carrying over the great play that had them winning the hardware into the new season. With Trine, it's a team we've seen a lot over the years. The defense has always been very good, but there was always that question mark about, who was going to get the bucket when you really needed it. They took a big step forward in that regard last year, and that's continued into this new season. And so far, the computer likes them performing at an elite level offensively, an elite level overall. So even though they started as one of the highest ranked teams in the preseason, they've even overperformed that to land themselves on one of the big movers up here.
Yeah, and they've looked great, and I think they're deserving of continuing that number one ranking. I think they looked really good. Next up, let's talk about Bowdoin. They've been under 500 every year since 2019, but they're 6-0 to start the year, so looking strong. Their wins are over Curry, over Regis, over Maine Presque Isle, Emmanuel, Maine Maritime, and Husson. Some of those names are going to be names that don't really impress you as far as wins go, but they do have Carnegie Mellon and Emory coming up next week. So let's see what Bowdoin can do against competition level. That's more like what they'll see in the NESCAC. But right now, jumping into the top 100 at number 76 overall is Bowdoin. They look pretty good so far to start the year. Next up, let's go to Stevens. 5-2 on the year. They've beaten St. Joseph's, Long Island, Scranton, New Jersey City, Baruch, Rutgers, Newark. Losses are to Catholic and Middlebury. So it's kind of like they've beaten everyone they should. They've lost to teams in the top 25. So we'll want to see them win some of those top 25 type games as well. But they were a tournament team last year, and I think they're looking pretty strong this year. Probably one of the Mac Freedom favorites this year. So I think this Stevens may be a team that we could be finding getting top 25 consideration, get some of those wins against those other top teams, and I think we'll talk about that for sure, but liking what we're seeing out of Stevens so far this year.
Yeah, you said it. The computer sees them right on the fringe of that top 25 status, but I think from a voter, you want to see them getting some wins against some other, teams in and around the top 25, and, before that actually starts making them a real contender. It's probably, I'm sure as a voter, you've probably got them watch listed somewhere. Yeah. And are waiting to see that kind of results before you're really ready to move them into the top 25 on a ballot.
Yeah. Next up is Grinnell, a team we know that is going to score a bunch of points whether or not they win. But I think this year they are going to win. Right now, 5-2. Computer has them back into the top 100. They're another one of these teams that hasn't really beaten anyone great, but they've done well against their schedule. And you can do that and get into the top 100. So we'll see what Grinnell will put up. I think they are one of the contenders in the Midwest Conference the last couple of years. It's been Grinnell and it's been Illinois College. So we'll see what comes down with that. But it's kind of fun to see a good Grinnell team, not just a Grinnell team that's like a sideshow a little bit. Like, I don't want to say that too negatively, but when they're good and doing what they do, then it's a fun team to follow. And I think that's probably what we have this year.
Yeah, and just taking a quick look at the conference page on d3datacast.com for the Midwest Conference, Illinois College still by the computer is number one in the MWC there, but it's a very narrow gap with Grinnell right behind them.
Going up next to Roger Williams, a team I think I mentioned above. They were a surprise tournament team last year. They won the Commonwealth Coast Conference in its final season as a conference of that name. They were, I think, the 5 seed in that tournament, but went on to win it. This year, they're looking pretty legitimate and not just as a fluke. They're kind of going from kind of a middle of the pack, maybe also ran, you make the tournament, but you get bounced really early, to a team that's like now in the top 100. At least that's how the computer sees them right now. They beat Riviere, who we talked about earlier on this list as another team on the rise. They have a 2-point loss at Clark and a loss at Conn College. So like those are not terrible losses. Those are like programs from big conferences. It's a pretty decent 4-2 start for them. They've been right around 500 for recent years, so looking good for Roger Williams this year, looking to build on last year's tournament run. And I think so far their start this year has things looking up for them.
Yeah, and that tournament in the Triple C last year was, not just them winning as a 5 seed, but I think it was carnage all the way throughout.
Yeah.
So kind of cool to see them on this list here to, I don't want to say validate or legitimize that conference tournament championship win, because I don't think you need to, you need to ever apologize or do that. But kind of cool to see them follow that up by appearing on a list here as we, take a look in at how the computer sees them as this season plays out in the early portion.
And I think sometimes when teams make big conference tournament runs, it's just fluky. But sometimes, as is maybe the case with TCNJ, they went on a big tournament run from more of like a middle-ish of the pack of the NJAC, Roger Williams. It might say that this team kind of grew as a team, grew together over the course of the season, and they were better at the end of the year than they were earlier in the year. And then maybe that leads into the next year of, hey, we're a better team now. We learned some things. We improved. Individuals improved, or we improved in what we're trying to do. And maybe that does lead into like more likely to outrank, projection systems the following year.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right, going up to Hiram next as one of our top 20 risers. I think they're kind of like Riviere and John Jay. They're a team that's rising from the bottom only to about the middle of the pack, but that's still a pretty big improvement from where they were a season ago. They're 3-3, like I said, like middle of the pack. Their wins are over Geneva. That's a program that was in the NCAA tournament last year. Pitt, Greensburg, and Elma. Their losses was overtime to Pitt Bradford, a 3-point loss at Albion. Their only double-digit losses to Wabash. And again, if you're kind of like an average Division III team, like a number 200-ish overall team, then a double-digit loss to Wabash is not completely terrible, because they're a program that's usually like a top 100 type team. So again, on the rise for Hiram, back into the middle of the pack. I think that shows maybe a rise of overall NCAC talent this year, and I think they're emblematic of that. Okay, next we're going to go to Chapman. Chapman is off to a 5-1 start. They have wins over George Fox, UC Santa Cruz, Puget Sound, Pacific Lutheran, Texas Lutheran. They have one loss. It's to Willamette by 6 points, but I think Willamette's only one loss themselves. They're one of 4 SCIAC programs in the top 100 right now. There's a 5th team just outside the top 100. So that's a really good conference right now. That's a conference that's been consistent and strong and kind of on the rise the last few years. So I think Chapman, I think that's a wide open race right now. Chapman maybe is in that mix as well. They were, maybe outside that top group last year, but I think for what they've shown earlier this year, they can kind of be in that top group maybe this season.
Yeah, all right. We need to talk about Averett, Matt. We've talked about Averett earlier in the show, in earlier episodes of the show during the season, and it probably wasn't as respectfully as we should have. So this is the time to put some respect on the name. You see, they entered the season ranked number 266 by the computer, and they had that win over Maryville, and we're like, Maryville, you're a top 25 team. You can't be losing to Averett, right? Well, Averett followed that up, Matt. They now also have a win over Christopher Newport, right? So they're not just hanging tough with good competition. They've already got a couple notable wins. And now they're ranked right in the middle of the ODAC. I think back to last year where there were a couple teams like putting themselves in the middle of the ODAC pack that were making a little bit of noise, like Bridgewater, Shenandoah, Ferrum. Those were all kind of in that group that, showed themselves to be capable of knocking off any of the teams near at the top. And Averett's already moved into that area. But this is going to be a big week for them, I think. They've got at Ferrum and home versus Virginia Wesleyan, another opportunity to show how much a factor they can be in the ODAC. And I tell you what, if you're a factor in the ODAC, you're a factor nationally.
Yeah, definitely. They've had results this year that I started off raising the eyebrow for their opponent. Like you said, Maryville, like we said, Christopher Newport. Like, why are you losing that game to Averett? But then you look overall, they're a lot better team than I thought they were coming into the year. We'll see how good. ODAC's going to be a meat grinder for everyone, but definitely interesting. It's a name that I'm going to be looking for on the scoreboard every night just to see who did they play, what was their score, did they win. They're on the radar for sure. All right, next up is Chatham. They're already 4-0 in conference play. the Pack gets things started really early. They're 6-1 overall. That one loss is a 22-point loss to Carnegie Mellon. Their wins against Carlow, Teal, St. Vincent, Allegheny, Washington and Jefferson, and Penn State Altoona. It's going to be an interesting Pack race. I know when we were doing our conference champions draft with kind of the gang, I didn't know who I was going to pick in the Pack. I think whoever made their pick maybe picked St. Vincent. I might have gone Chatham. I wasn't quite sure. It was kind of a toss-up, but I think that they've put themselves in that mix. We'll have to see how good they are. The computer has them. What does that number say on the screen? 62 overall. That kind of still feels a little bit high based on who they've actually beaten this year. But again, 6-1 overall. I think they're doing pretty well. So we're going to have to see if Chatham is a player in the PAC.
Well, and I want to say I think they are, Matt, because you said 4-0 already in conference play, and it's not like it's all 4-0 against teams predicted to be at the bottom. With wins over St. Vincent, Washington, Jefferson. Of course, this was really a St. Vincent, Geneva race last year. Washington and Jefferson, you can count on to be at least in that top half mix. So this isn't just beating up on some teams that are going to be bottom feeders in the Pack.
Yeah, you're right. Getting some of those wins already under their belt now, I think maybe does portend good things for them down the stretch. All right, Zach, an opportunity for us to look foolish already tonight as we record on Sunday night is St. Joseph's Maine on the Biggest Risers. They are, I think, still on the court. I think they had a Sunday night game, so we'll have to see how that plays out. But at least heading into Sunday's play, they were one of the teams on the rise. Pretty big on the rise, maybe borderline top 50 overall. I think the GNAC is a conference that has gotten a lot better the last few years than it was. Big name there, St. Joseph, Connecticut, but others have been on the rise as well, although maybe in the next slide we'll get into that a little bit more. But St. Joseph's Maine, 4-2. They've beaten Wheaton, Mass., Western Connecticut, Husson, and Maine Farmington. One of their losses is a road loss to WPI by 7 points. If WPI is great and you lose to them on the road by 7, like that's what like a number top 100 type team can do. Like if you're number 50 overall, like sure, maybe. The way that our computer rankings work, we talked about that. Like if you lose a competitive game to a top team, they say like, yeah, you're probably pretty good. So that's not a bad loss at all. So we have to see what St. Joseph's Maine is down the stretch. Hopefully they've won on Sunday night to keep this also relevant. But they've looked strong so far.
And a similar move, Matt, for Gwynedd Mercy next on the list here. Very kind of similar profile to St. Joseph's Maine. They're 5-0 with an average margin victory of 29 points, but they've played competition that all rates as below average by the computer. And it doesn't really get a whole lot tougher from here. So we'll have to see what we can really learn about Gwynedd Mercy. They've got Marymount twice and Alvernia, but that's kind of, air quote, tough games compared to some of the schedules we see from other, top 100 teams nationally.
Yeah. Okay, update on St. Joseph's Maine. They do defeat Southern Maine 98-86. They've won by 12, so hopefully that keeps them in the mix here for a top 20 type riser. All right, going on to Plymouth State. They're 5-1. They have a loss to Rivier. We've talked about them as a team on the rise above. They've beaten Elms. They've beaten Vermont State Johnson, VTSU Johnson, if you will, New England College, LaSalle, and Salem State. Things are going to get tougher for them when Little East play begins, though. So they're 5-1 right now. We'll see how that goes once they play, your Keene States of the world, your Eastern Connecticut's. But so far, Plymouth State has been on the rise. One of those teams that's kind of flipping from being just a below average team to just an above average team, kind of in the whole Division III landscape. And the last one on this list here is UW-Stevens Point. They've won all 6 of the games they've played so far, which has been a lot of Northern Athletics teams and NUMAC opponents, if we're being honest.
UMAC.
Sorry, UMAC. What did I say?
NUMAC.
NUMAC. No, UMAC. Around them, yes.
We'd love to see some WIAC NUMAC action.
That would be fun.
That would be fun.
On Sunday, they beat 1-7 St. Olaf by 22. I think St. Stevens Point has the chance to be in the mix in the WIAC this year. We don't know how good they're going to be. They haven't really played strong competition level yet, but we don't have to wait too long to find out. Of their next 4 games, 3 of them are against Trine, Christopher Newport, and Randolph-Macon. So Stevens Point's competition level's about to go up a notch, and we'll maybe get a chance to see just exactly how good the Pointers are this season.
So those are the 20 who've made the biggest move in their efficiency rating compared to the preseason. Of course, Matt, you can only move up if someone's moving down. So we got to talk about the biggest movers down. The list starts with Penn State Abington.
Yeah, they're 0-8, and head-to-head losses telling the computer that they should be behind Washington College and St. Joseph Brooklyn. If you have lost to those teams, that's kind of like a recipe for your rank from going like already pretty bad to kind of worse. These are some of these teams, like a team like ranked 337 doesn't have a ton of room to go down, but they've gone down the most so far. That's 27.4 points of efficiency margin. 0-8 so far. UEC's not the strongest competition level out there, so maybe they can get some wins in conference, but right now it's not been a strong start for Penn State Abington.
And next on the list, Matt, you talked about that game between St. Olaf and Stevens Point. The Ole's got a season opening win over Stout, but it's been 0-7 since then, including that loss to Stevens Point, and some of the margins have looked ugly, which of course, it's one thing to lose, it's another thing to lose ugly, and the computer doesn't like seeing teams lose ugly. It's going to knock you for that. So not the direction you want to see for a St. Olaf program that's coming on, off a sub 500 season in the MIAC play. Of course, the MIAC schedule is a little bit different this year, a little bit truncated from previous years. That leaves more room for non-conference schedule, and that's not been to the Ole's favor so far this season.
Yeah, next up on our droppers is Mount St. Mary. They do have a 4-point win over SUNY Cobleskill, but they've lost to big margins to Rutgers Newark, Alfred State, Bard, Vassar, and Sage. 1-5 in those types of games, that's not a recipe for success. Mount St. Mary's has dropped to kind of like the 400 levels in Division III.
You mentioned the GNAC earlier, Matt, but we got to talk about Albertus Magnus making the list here as one of the biggest droppers on the list. Disappointing 2-7 start for Albertus Magnus after spending the last few years really as a solid number 2 in the GNAC behind St. Joseph. They've really fallen off, and it's a strange mix of results, Matt. They had a halftime lead against John Carroll, and that turned into an 18-point loss. A 3-point loss in overtime to Franklin and Marshall doesn't seem bad at all when you consider where Franklin and Marshall was in that Centennial race a year ago. A 4-point loss to a Montclair State team that seems to always be in the mix in the NJAC, but then also a 33-point loss at Babson. It's a big departure from what we've seen from Albertus Magnus over the past few years.
Yeah, for sure. We had them in like top 50 type games in November lists. They're a team that is pesky or good, legitimately good the last couple of seasons, and not the start that they were looking for by any stretch.
And not the start that Juniata is looking for either, Matt. 0-6 to start, and it's a program that usually posts records at the end of the season that doesn't indicate that there was ever a 6-game losing streak in there. A 1-point overtime loss at Lycoming is Lycoming's only win on the season so far. Everything else has been a 14-plus point loss, and computer does not like that.
Yeah, not strong. Not a strong start for Juniata for sure. Next up on our list is Warren Wilson, and they've only fallen 3 spots, but that's from 407 to 410. You don't have a lot of room to go down when you already start at 407, but that's what Warren Wilson has done this year. 0-7. They've lost to 3 ODAC teams. That's Ferrum twice. That's Lynchburg. They've lost by like an average of 48 points, I think, on that. And then the non-ODACs, ODACs are tough, especially if you're a program that's trying to gain some momentum. But if you're looking at their non-ODAC teams, they've lost to them. Obviously, they're 0-7, but they're all teams that are kind of in the bottom half of Division III as well, outside of maybe like the top 240 range. So tough start for Warren Wilson this year, which has been kind of a continuation of where things were the previous season as well.
And it's not great when you've taken a loss to someone else on this list here, Matt, but that's the case for SUNY Delhi. They've lost to Albertus Magnus. and they are also responsible for Anna Maria's lone win of the season so far. Not what you want to see out of Delhi.
No, that's not, and also not what you want to see out of Alma, who is 0-7 on the season. Their only single-digit margin in those losses was the season opener at Wittenberg. That is not what you want.
Matt, it's a 2-year downward trend now for sure for Wheaton after finishing outside the top 200 last year. Their preseason ranked number 112 by the computer. But, as we talked about at the beginning, there's some historical information there going back 2 years. So Wheaton, historically a pretty good program, a very good program, buoyed by that a bit. But, this Wheaton team is clearly not back to being the Wheaton program that we've come to expect, before the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, you have to think that they're going to turn it around at some point. I think they have some youth and inexperience, maybe. So right now is not the time that it has been happening for that turnaround. And last on our list, our 10th dropper mover down is Massachusetts College. They're 0-8 to start the season. A couple of those have been close, though. They have a 3-point loss at Coast Guard and a 1-point loss to Norwich, but ultimately it's 0-8, and it's 13 points of efficiency margin that they have dropped since the projections have hit.
So those are the 20 biggest movers up, the 10 biggest fallers down. But Matt, there were a few other things of note that we wanted to talk about, some teams or some dynamics. Let's start with UW Lacrosse. You have them as the top ranked WIAC in your top 25 ballot after, you know, uh, Platteville entered the season ranked so high. They, ran away with the conference last year. But UW Lacrosse has been one of the pleasant surprises of the early season. A team we saw at the Great Lakes Invitational when they had, big margin wins over Marietta and Johns Hopkins. And those are the kinds of performances that will impress both humans and computers. And especially after following it up with that 9-point win at St. John's, just a few days after returning from Grand Rapids.
Yeah, and they were very nearly on our list. I think when we ran the top 20, they were like number 21 or 22. So UW Lacrosse definitely fits this profile. And I think it is a little bit more difficult for teams that are hitting that, like we saw Trine in there, but teams that are kind of in that top 25, pushing for like top 10 spots, it's difficult to rise that far. But UW Lacrosse is a team, I think you're absolutely right, has done that this season.
Matt, let's talk about Anderson. That's been another team that's been on our radar. Uh, you mentioned some of the problems we had as we were preparing for the conference champions draft. I think the HCAC was one of two conferences that was left on the board because our panel didn't really know what to make of it. Of course, Anderson has been the class of that league for the last few years, but they had a number of significant transfers. I think losing two players to Division Two, another transfer to Trine. So it's like, what do we make of Anderson? And I think what we make of them is they're still the same program we've come to expect over the last couple of years, basically.
Yeah, they're still pretty good. They did take a loss this week to North Park, which maybe dampened some of that excitement a little bit. I had them in maybe my top 25 last week. Some other voters did as well. I think they were in the D3Hoops.com top 25. I'm guessing they'll fall out this week. The computer right now has them at number 71 overall, which is kind of where they've been, kind of that, maybe not exactly there, but that top 100, but maybe outside the top 25 type of team. So anywhere in that like 25 to 100 range. They are up 1.6 points of efficiency margin from the preseason. So they are on the rise. Again, that was probably higher before their loss to North Park this week. But I think they're pretty good. I think they're a team that can hang with anyone, that can beat anyone, but they might drop a game or two along the way. But in the HCAC, that can get you pretty far. That whole league is solid but not great, and I think Anderson's going to be in the mix there for sure this year.
It's a good time to check in on the CCIW. We go back to our week one show. We talked about hot takes, bold predictions. Matt, you had one. You put the target on your back from CCIW Nation, making the claim that you thought the CCIW would remain down, a bit of a down year last year, at least in terms of the top national quality at the top. What we're used to seeing, like multiple second weekend tournament team type contending teams. Let's check in on the CCIW. Is the computer seeing any movement to indicate that you are onto something, or that you are, setting yourself up to look very foolish as the months go on?
I'm always setting myself up to look foolish, so let's just get that out of the way first.
Sure.
But no, the computer right now has one CCIW team in the top 25. That's Illinois Wesleyan. I have one in my ballot. That's Illinois Wesleyan. They are up 7.5 points of efficiency margin from the preseason. There are three other teams that are on the rise as far as from their preseason projections. That is North Central, Augustana, and Carthage. All three of those are currently in the top 100. Carthage is in at number 79. North Central is in at number 84, and Augustana is in at number 96. And they're all, 3, 4, 5, 6 points of efficiency margin above where they were in the preseason. So we'll need to see more of that from them to kind of enter that national conversation. And that was kind of my point, is I thought I only saw one team in the CCIW that would be kind of that top 25 or maybe second weekend NCAA tournament. I thought that was Illinois Wesleyan. I know Carthage was getting a lot of love from voters and from that conference's coaches poll as being another team there. I think Augustana and Carthage are good. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them does kind of work their way into that top 25 type picture. I do kind of agree with the computer, though. I personally want to see a little bit more right now. And for me, those three programs are kind of maybe just on the outside looking in.
And none of those three have reached the 8-game mark yet. So the trajectory is certainly in the improving direction as the preseason kind of starting point weans away. But at this point, probably not enough for that alone to vault any of those teams kind of into the elite.
Yeah. Right.
Sweet 16 contender type category.
Yeah, they would need more on top of that. And I should correct myself. Elmhurst is also still in the top 100 at 98. They are just down 5.3 points of efficiency margin from the preseason projections. They're still a top 100 team, just not quite as high as the preseason had them.
All right, Matt, we've had a few opportunities to talk about the ODAC here. Another one we want to talk about here is Randolph-Macon. Going into each of the last few seasons, it seems like, okay, this is the year Randolph-Macon takes a step back. And we've seen them kind of struggle or need to find themselves a bit in the early season. It seems like that's happening again. I guess what is the computer seeing right now? Is this finally when we're going to see some sort of tail off from Randolph-Macon?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think so. They've another one of these teams that's only played 4 games, so they're still kind of 50-50 projection and in-season data. They are down a little bit from the projection, 3.6 points of efficiency margin, but the computer still has them like number 5-ish overall. I'm personally somewhat skeptical of that. I'm not voting for them right now. The computers are still okay with them. There's more data pending. They're going to play an ODAC schedule, so they're going to get a lot of opportunities. They're either going to prove themselves worthy or they're not. There's maybe a third option, though. I could see Randolph-Macon being one of these teams that does take some losses, but takes some close losses to good teams, and maybe ends up as a team that the computer still really likes, but that the human voters are maybe not super in love with. Maybe a team like Mary Washington was last year, or even Emory was last year, that the computers were still pretty good with what they were doing, but they took a few more losses than a human voter would want to see. I could see that being Randolph-Macon this year. Again, they've only played 4 games, so none of us really know exactly what we're going to get with the Yellow Jackets right now.
And if our viewers remember, when we talked about the preseason efficiency ratings, Matt, we made some picks. That's what we do. We, like you said, we're always setting ourselves up to look silly. We made some picks, some teams that were like in the top 25 range that would exceed, some teams in the top 100 that we thought were set up to exceed the preseason rating, and then someone outside of the top 100.
Yeah, I'll run down your picks and give an update, and then my picks. You had Tufts as a team to beat projections at 15.5 efficiency margin. They are up a little bit, even with that loss we talked about this week to WPI. They're at 19.9 points of efficiency margin to the positive side. So Tufts is on the rise. Wisconsin Lutheran, 18.3 better than 18.3 overall, which is about 7 better than the projection. So you are currently on track to get that right now, and it's close for Yeshiva, but they're at 1.8 versus their 1.5 projection. So you're currently 0.3 points to the plus side on that one. Now we're getting probably some big noise in there from a big loss to Trinity, Connecticut. I'll have to look exactly what the computer thinks of that one, but just some more normal games for them in there, and they'll probably rise.
Yeah,
above.
no more 40-point losses.
Yeah, we can't take too many more of those. For me, I had Platteville to beat. Currently, they are 19.3 versus the 16.1 projection. TCNJ, we talked about them on the rise. They are winning big, 20.9 efficiency margin versus the 7.7 projection. And we also had Ohio Northern on the list. They are up about 13 points to 17.1 currently. We both picked one team to miss. You picked WPI, Zach, not looking great for you. They're currently at a 22.3 efficiency margin versus the 16.9 projection, so you get a red on that one. And I picked Keene State, also not looking good. I'm about 1.5 points to the wrong side of that. They're at 22.1 versus the 20.6 projection. So our picks to miss, and I think we both wanted a top 25 team to miss, and those teams both look solid right now.
All right, good thing to end on something that we're currently not hitting the mark on, Matt, because it's time to go to the picks and review how we did last week.
Yeah, here's our picks last week. First game was La Crosse against St. John's. I picked La Crosse to cover a 3.5-point computer line, and they won that game outright by 9. You went with St. John's, so I get that pick. In the Battle of the Systems, it was Greenville and Grinnell. The line was 15 points in favor of Grinnell. We both took Grinnell, and they won 125-101, so we both get that point. In today's game that we already mentioned, Yeshiva versus Trinity, Connecticut. I say today because we're recording on Sunday. Obviously, you're not listening on Sunday, but we both said that line was way too big at 17.5, but the line could never be big enough because the Bantams win 84-43. We both missed that pick. Babson and Brandeis, another game we both went together on the wrong side. It was Babson that won 77-63. They were 6-point underdogs, and we missed that pick. And our game of the week was that WPI Tufts match that we talked about earlier. We both picked Tufts, but it was WPI that won outright 74-61. We both missed that pick. So as a score update, Zach, you went 1-4, and you are now 7-13 overall. You need some work to get to 500. I'm also below 500. I went 2-3 last week, 9-11 overall, but I'm still 2 games ahead of you. So let's make up some ground this week. Here are our picks. Our first game is Stockton. They are 8-point underdogs at TCNJ. Zach, who do you like in this one?
Matt, I've got to turn it around, and I can't be afraid of big numbers. Give me TCNJ.
Okay, you're going to go and you're going to cover the 8. I am afraid of that big number, and I'm going to go with Stockton. I just know the NJAC all the time has wild games, wild finishes. I think 8 points in the NJAC is almost too big for anyone. I know TCNJ is great, but I'm going to go with Stockton. Our second game favors John Carroll at home by 2.5 points against Mount Union. Who's your pick?
Mount Union is my pick here, Matt. The computer line is based on factors that the computer can't know. As a human, I am able to adapt to the situation at hand here with John Carroll. And so based on the difference of what I know versus what the computer can know at this time, I feel like I've got to take what ought to be an advantage with the Purple Raiders.
I'm going to go with John Carroll. I'm going to buck the trend. I know that, or I'm pretty sure, almost positive that Luke Chacon going to be out for a while here. But I think they've had about a week and a half after the GLI to figure out what they're going to do without him. I think John Carroll regroups and can win this game, cover the 2.5-point line. Our Region 10 battle is our third game. That's Hardin-Simmons at Whitman. Whitman is 4-point favorites in this one, but who do you like as your pick?
I like Whitman to cover the 4 at home, Matt. I think just those trips to the Pacific Northwest are tough. Just getting to Walla Walla is not easy. Give me Whitman.
Yeah, I'm going to pick Whitman as well. I don't think either of these two teams is quite what I expected of them to be this year, but of the two, Whitman's been more of what I have expected. I don't think Hardin-Simmons has. For me, they've underperformed my expectations. I know it's a 4-point line, but I think you're right. It's a long trip. I think Whitman can give those points and still cover that line. Down in Southern California, we're staying on the West Coast. It's Redlands at Cal Lutheran, a big SCIAC matchup. Cal Lu, the computer favors Cal Lu by 2.5 points. Zach, what's your pick?
I'm gonna go with Cal Lu. I'm not quite sure what to make of Redlands just yet, Matt. I know that it seems like there's enough familiarity in SCIAC play
Yeah.
there to handle the what Redlands throws at you. So give me the Kingsmen.
Yeah, I'm gonna say basically the same thing here. I'm Last year I was in love with Redlands early, and then they kind of fell off late. And I'm convinced it's the SCIAC now knows how to handle Redlands, and Cal Lutheran's good. Redlands is good. They're both good, but I think Cal Lutheran. We saw them in a game down in Bloomington, Illinois, against Calvin. They looked great in that game. I think that team is also a team that can handle that type of pace, and so I'm going to take the Kingsmen. And then our D3 Datacast game of the week is a chance for me to personally look foolish. We're going down to the CCIW. It's Carthage at Illinois Wesleyan, and I'm sure the Titans are just thrilled with all the things that I have said about them being the only competitive team in the CCIW. And I think I've said that they're going to go like 16-0 in the conference or whatever the number of games they have there. So Carthage is going to Bloomington as 8.5-point underdogs. Zach, what's your pick?
Another big number that I'm not going to be scared of, Matt.
Okay.
No one can hang with the Titans at the Shirk Center. Give me Illinois Wesleyan in this one.
All right. I am picking them as well. I think Illinois Wesleyan has looked great. I think they're better than the computer thinks they are. So that means I think they should beat this line. It's a big line. It's a line that is pretty scary, but Titans at home by more than 8.5. Give that to me. So we agreed on 3 picks this week, had 2 different. We'll see how that shakes out. All right, Zach, take us through Upset Watch.
I think you mean upset watch, Matt. We have used this to highlight some interesting ranked versus unranked games this week. And Matt, we've got a couple teams to highlight here in the ODAC. Number 13, Hampton Sydney will take on Roanoke December 4th, and then December 7th they'll be at Randolph Macon. Some similar games here for number 17, Guilford. They play December 4 at Randolph Macon and December 7th at Randolph. And Matt, I think this is the kind of thing we can expect throughout ODAC play this
Yeah.
year. I think it's really setting up where you're going to have a group of ODAC teams that are maybe kind of just inside the top 25 picture, and then another group of teams that are kind of just on the outside of the top 25 picture. So in any given week, I think you'll see some very similar games like this, whether it's Hampton City and Guilford in, you could see at some point maybe Roanoke is in, Randolph
Yeah.
Macon back in the top 25 and playing, one of those pesky teams that are just on the outside. Now, would Hampton Sydney losing at Randolph Macon really be an upset? No, I don't think anyone would really call that an upset. Rivalry game at Randolph Macon. Again, that's why this is upset watch. We got a ranked opponent, we got an unranked opponent. Just another fun way to talk about what should be some really interesting games. And I think we're going to have a whole season full of these in the ODAC.
Yeah, always fun to watch the ODACs. Whatever they're on, tune it in for sure. I think on this list of 4 games, maybe Guilford at Randolph would be the only one that would be the closest thing to a true upset. But I think Randolph has a chance to be pretty good this year. So
Yeah.
we'll have to see about that one as well.
Yeah, Randolph played a good game at Roanoke earlier this week. Roanoke it really closed the game well, but it was a pretty tight game. And so, on the right night, I think Randolph is a team that's capable of knocking off a team who's maybe more of a fringe top 25 ODAC team.
Yeah. All right, Zach, what have you got in the mailbag for us?
Matt, we got a few to go through here. First one from our good buddy Drew Latrenta. 2 very different independent questions. He says, "How are daily score predictions on the website ordered?" Let's just start with that one. Of course, d3datacast.com. You can go to score predictions and see how the D3 Datacast computer is picking that game with in an exact, I'll say, or a predicted final score.
Yeah. It looks at the d3hoops.com scoreboard page, and it lists the games in the same order as on that scoreboard page. So that's the order. Yeah.
Well, okay. And so typically what that has is the top 25 games are at the top. And then after that, I think it's by the start of the game time.
Start time. Yep. Correct.
Yeah, my
Yep.
start time. All right, number 2 here from Drew. Memories of the Redlands system. How was it the same slash different than Grinnell Greenville systems today?
Is that the old Redland system that they're talking about, or the new Redland system?
I don't know, because I think of the like the current Redland system is really like the Eric Bridgeland system,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And I think that's different because I think to me it's more different what they try to do offensively. Like the Redland system to me that they play right now is all about putting that pressure, use the length and athleticism to try to turn you over in the backcourt. Um, and yeah, that'll lead to a lot of easy buckets, but that's not necessarily like Grinnell, Greenville trying to get the shot up early in the shot clock, playing full line change like 2 to 3 minutes at a time.
Yeah, and it's probably not fair to Greenville and Grinnell. Sometimes I think of those systems as they'll pressure initially on defense, but then kind of once you get past half court, they'll almost let you get a layup just so they can get the ball and take it back down and take a fast shot. That's not really what Redlands is trying to do. And I think also offensively, Redlands is not trying to just get a fast shot. I think they're trying to get a good shot. Sometimes a Greenville or Grinnell might be also just trying to get a fast shot. But again, we're conflating different things, and I think you should have an actual Grinnell person. Listen to other shows out there. Like I think they've been on QCast or Hoopsville or whatever, and listen to those people talk about their systems on there. But there are some differences for sure.
Next one, Matt, comes from Mike Navarre. How many NCAC teams make the tournament this year now that regional rankings are gone? OAC always seem to suck the air out of the region. Thoughts?
I don't know. I'd pick one. I think one NCAC team will make the tournament this year. Unless, like, I think Worcester is looking good. There might be the team that's in position to get an at-large bid if they get upset. Off the top of my head, I don't know that they're going to be like automatically a 2-bid league. Yeah, the OAC I think has. I don't know that they've been advantaged by the old system necessarily, but if you as a conference were able to get multiple teams into the regional rankings and another conference was just outside the regional rankings, then maybe that would have been a big deal. But I think in NPI last year, like Mount Union would have actually gotten in, and they weren't in by the committee system. So they would have had an extra bid in the OAC, and that wouldn't have been like the NCAC would have been an extra bid last year. So I have a little bit of a question of the or a problem with the way the question is phrased. Like the OAC was maybe being unfairly advantaged in the old system. I don't think that's really the case. But everyone under NPI, every conference has the same opportunity, and it doesn't matter if your league gets an extra regionally ranked team and that extra 2 or 4 opportunities to get regionally ranked games. That is not necessarily a thing anymore.
And bigger than the conference, I think it similarly impacts the region as a whole. It seems like every year we talk about Region 7 being one of the deepest regions, and there's only room for 7 teams in the regional rankings. And Mount Union was impacted by that last year. And so we know from watching, you beat the team who might be 8th, 9th, 10th in Region 7, and that might be as good of a win as, I don't know, Team 6 in Region 2, but the old system wouldn't reward that or couldn't reward that. I think that will change with NPI, but that doesn't necessarily help the NCAC any more or less than the OAC or the MIAA or, any other team in any other deep region. Region 6, similar dynamic. There were teams off the board there in Region 6 that if you had beaten that team, that's a good win, but you weren't going to get credit for it. We'll have to see. The NPI officially will be released at some point in the future. When and how the NCAA deems it appropriate, I don't know. We've seen some different things as the fall season has played out. The cadence to that seems to change. It seems like they started publishing them officially kind of around the time that you would expect regional rankings in the old system. And at first they were coming weekly, and then we would get updates like daily, maybe during the last week of like soccer season, for instance. So who knows when that'll be for basketball season, but it doesn't matter, Matt. because you're running NPI on your computer every day. D3Datacast.com/NPI. You can get your daily NPI update regardless of how and when or where the NCAA decides to release them officially. Now, I will add, Matt, we're very early into this, but the NCAC is looking pretty good. Worcester is number 1 here as of the latest update, with Denison number 6, Oberlin number 31. So we'll have to see how it plays out, but it is possible that the NCAC could be in position here.
Yeah, I maybe undersold what Denison could be like. And Oberlin's look strong too. So we'll have to see, keep winning your non-conference games. That's like a biggest way to get highly ranked in NPI, like as a conference. And then, you have to win some of those good games. We'll see.
A third mailbag here from EMAC. Discuss how and why so much parity in the WBCA 10 people poll versus the D3 Hoops poll of 25. They are 25 people that follow the entire country and seem way more accurate with talent, competition, comparisons, and schedules. And apparently, this is something EMAC has discussed with our friend Riley Zayas. Man, I don't know if you have any initial reaction. I did try to do a little side by side here to take a look at the most recent WBCA top 25 compared to the D3Hoops.com poll. And I highlighted in red where teams were 5 or more spots different. Actually, the red is where the WBCA poll is lower on a particular team. And then I think there was just one case where it was 5 or more spots higher. So I don't know that I have any reaction to the differences between the two polls in terms of who is ranked and where. But I think the big thing to note, as EMAC does in this thing here, is that the WBCA poll is just a 10-person panel. I think they have one women's head coach from each of the 10 regions, whereas the D3Hoops.com poll is made up of 25 people, and I know they are spread around the country. I don't know how evenly or exactly what that is, but it's between media members, administrators, coaches. So it's a variety of people. And so I would just say that, if you've got a poll with 10 people and a poll of 25 people, that WBCA poll with only 10 people means each voter carries 2.5 times the weight of any voter in the D3Hoops.com poll. So if they get a little wonky with their ballot, that's going to have a much bigger effect than on any one ballot that might be a little goofy in the D3Hoops.com poll.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I've always just followed the D3Hoops.com poll, or that's the one I've been more familiar with. And I think those folks do a pretty good job too. So I don't have a lot of personal history with the WBCA poll.
And it's interesting because the NABC on the men's side does not do a poll. They, put out graphics, and it's just they put their own graphics on the D3Hoops.com poll rather than publishing their own. So I don't know the history involved there. But it seems they've decided that it's not worth doing their own poll, whereas the WBCA still likes putting out theirs. Let's finish up with one more, Matt. It's an epic mailbag with 4 here. Team MSL, cool to hear your thoughts on classic D3 gyms and the best rivalries. Matt, we love to plug in old episode. Let's go all the way back to episode 5, where we made some suggestions for a Division III basketball bucket list, and some of the things we talked about in there, venues and rivalries. So I'm just going to leave it by pointing back to episode 5 of the D3 Datacast. We still don't really know what we're doing, but we really didn't know what we were doing back on episode 5. That was 90 episodes ago. But we'll put a little, iCard up here so you can click right to it. But otherwise, you could look for episode 5 of the D3 Datacast. I don't know if you have any updates since we did that episode, Matt, that you've really been thinking about in terms of classic D3 gyms or rivalries that you would love to see.
No, there's still something cool about like old style gyms. I don't know if we have a ton of them anymore in Division 3, or sometimes you watch on a live stream and there's a gym and it looks like there's maybe seating for like 100 people, but then there's like a walkway with a railing kind of around the top, or like a running track, and there's students hanging all over it. It feels like everyone's on top of the action. Those are kind of cool too. I don't have a lot in mind though necessarily. So yeah, the bucket list, just for rivalries, we know some of the good ones. We know Calvin and Hope in our region. We know Hampton Sydney Randolph Macon is very strong.
Williams
Williams
Amherst.
Amherst is a big rivalry out in the Northeast. I don't know if Worcester and Wittenberg has quite the strength, the ferocity that it had 15 years ago or so, but I know that is a classic rivalry as well. So those are some of the top Division III rivalries. I know there's a ton out there. Who's your top rivalry? If you're watching this, post your rivalry games down below in the YouTube comments, and we'll make sure we check those out because those are fun to watch when you're on live stream and you see just packed crowds and students going nuts. Those are fun. You can get those atmospheres through on the live stream as well.
Absolutely. Thanks to everyone who submitted to the mailbag. If you have something for us to address at the end of the next episode, you can leave a message here on this episode on YouTube and we will get it to you, or contact us through social media. We would love to address your concern, your comment. And Matt, we also want to thank our Patreon members at patreon.com/D3 Datacast. These are the people who have gone above and beyond. They help support us financially to do what we do. To support D3Datacast.com being free of ads, being free of paywalls. Matt, we talk a lot about in this episode, we talked a lot about the efficiency ratings, all that kind of fun stuff that your computer runs. And it's all just there for anyone to see, whether they they don't have to subscribe or get locked out behind a paywall. It's just there for the entire Division III community to reference and enjoy. And we have these people to thank for it.
Yeah, we thank them so much, whether they've signed up for the $3 a month tier or the $5 a month tier. It helps us out so much, keeps the site ad-free, and it helps us to do these shows. We appreciate that. We have a good time doing it, Zach, and before we go, we have one last thing to say. Good job,
Good job, team.